welcome everybody to Books by Adrian, and this is the Books by Adrian podcast. It's a nice little companion piece to our live stream Sunday flagship show. Today's guest of Odette Bach wasn't able to join me for the podcast, so we have Mr. David Hopkins with us today, and we're going to have a great show with him instead. Mr. David Hopkins, can you take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience? Let us know who you are, where you're from, and what you got going on.
Yeah, my name is David Hopkins. I am not the original guest, so let's just take a moment and realize that it'll be okay. No, I've been an author. I've been working in some sort of full-time, part-time, some of the time capacity, writing professionally for about 2 decades. I worked in comics. I did some journalism. I've been writing right now a fantasy series called The DRYAD'S CROWN, which just last night I finished book 4, and we'll have it out about mid-October. So yeah, that's kind of where I am with it. I've been exploring the deep waters of indie writing and publishing, which I guess leads me here to you.
To the authority on the subject.
Exactly.
What are you doing here? You're so accomplished. Okay, so the 4th book in your fantasy series. When did the first book come out? How many years ago?
The first book came out in last December.
That recently?
Well, they're novellas. They're novellas. So we'll put it. That needs to always be said. If it was a novel series, that would be quite impressive. But no, they're each about 20,000 words long. And so I'm working, if you look, a writer, whether you're working another job or not, 2,000 words a week is a pretty good goal. It's doable depending on kind of how you set your time aside. But if I'm doing about 2,000 words a week, you can hit that 20,000 word mark. And the goal is to release a book every 3 months. And the series itself will be about nine books long. And that means it'll be done really by the end of 2022. And then we'll wrap it up and we'll move on to the next thing. But I wanted to, instead of sitting down and just writing like a big mammoth telephone book of a novel, I thought it might be better to break it up and kind of have that experience where I'm serializing it, just getting people's reactions. And in many ways, it can be a little bit more hectic because you're not just going off in a cave and writing. You're writing, but you're also editing your previous work, and you're also marketing the stuff that you've got out right now. So you're kind of doing it all at once.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot to do all at once. And so many people don't realize how many jobs independent authors have. It's not one job; it's more like 9 to 15. 'Cause you're not just writing the book; you're editing, you're marketing, you're doing interviews, In my case, you're running a YouTube channel. Like,
exactly.
I mean, putting Livestream Sunday together, just like getting everybody organized, getting a schedule out. Before episode 1 came out, I had the entire schedule done, all 16 episodes. You know exactly what's coming this season. Like, I'm running a tight ship around here.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of work.
It is, but this is also part of the appeal. Is a lot of people who go into indie publishing, they gasp at the idea that if they were traditionally published, they would have zero say on what their cover looked like. Like none. I mean, maybe they might allow you to say a few things.
They'll ask you your opinion, but then they'll ignore it. Yeah.
Exactly, because they're the experts. They are the overeducated marketing gurus in their field, and they'll put together a good cover. But I know a lot of the indie authors that I talk with, they like being able to have ideas and to organize and really to have a say on how they're presented and how their work comes across. I think about the DRYAD'S CROWN, and I think the visual appearance of the covers and I think it's actually far too feminine for a traditional publisher. They would look at it and be like, but you're like an old bearded balded guy. Like we got to put like something more badass on the cover.
Do you have any of the image? Do you have like your cover like on an image on your computer that you can share?
Yeah, let me see. Actually, I'm terrible at screen sharing, but let's see if I can bring it up.
I can walk you through it very quickly. There's a share button at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a computer with a plus sign.
I see it.
On that. you can choose either a video file or your screen. And when you share your screen, whatever's on there, it'll come up on my computer first before the audience sees it. So when you're happy with what you're seeing, then I'll go ahead and push it through.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, that's screen 1 right there.
Because I would love to see those covered.
Yeah, let me see here if I can.
It's one of the things that I'm most afraid of right now. Like I've just recently finished my first draft. I'm editing my first draft for my debut novel, and one of the things I like, it has nothing. It's so weird because it's not writing related. It's the cover. The cover is what I'm dreading. I'm like, what am I going to do for the cover? I have no idea what I'm going to do for the cover.
I think the good thing about it with designing a cover is there's a lot of people out there that you can pull their opinions from.
Sure. Especially, the artists that you hire, because I'm no artist.
Yeah. Did it share?
I would love some input. Oh, I'm not seeing it yet.
Okay. Let me try again.
You're gonna click share. You're gonna share screen, and then you're gonna tell it which screen to share, and it should pop right. There it is.
There you go.
There it is. This one here.
Yeah. Now it's not moving on your Kindle, but this is an animation of it.
I like it.
And this is book 1. And we can go and look at book 2. They all have a very similar visual look. Now, I am very fortunate in that my wife is a graphic designer. So my wife actually...
That is a load off your mind, isn't it?
It is. There's a hidden burrow near Barkham, which is book 2. And then book 3, which is the most recent one to come out, right there. But what we did was we went on Creative Market and we actually found some graphics that we could get the licensing rights to. And then she arranged it, organized it. We had some back and forth, good back and forth on how we wanted the text treatment and kind of how we wanted each one to look.
Beautiful covers. Is it a
you.
matte finish? It looks like it would lend itself well to a matte finish.
Well, right now it's a digital finish, but when it's printed, it will definitely that matte, nice matte. So good to touch and kind of rub your cheek against.
Yeah, it has that written all over it. That's the kind of cover that you would rub right on your face.
Yeah, and then part of it also is, I'm not working with. There's really about 2 or 3 book cover websites that do it for almost everyone in the genre fiction world. So on one end, it doesn't look like any of the other ones, which is a good thing because it separates it, but it's also a bad thing because it doesn't look like any of the other covers. In the world of marketing, it's kind of a double-edged sword there because
you stand out, but you don't want to stand out too much. It's a whole balancing act. Yeah.
It really is. But one thing that we were very conscious of is I did not want to have a, badass woman in breastplate armor with a bloody sword standing over a vanquished foe as she to me, I want to tell a softer, gentler story, even though it does have some gritty moments. So we really were trying to create something that didn't have that appearance. And so, I'm happy with how it came together. But once again, as an indie author, you have that creative freedom. And even when I was working in comics, I loved being an indie creator because there was just so much freedom to kind of, dig your own grave and try things out. And if it didn't work, that was fine because you could keep going.
What it's a double-edged sword, I think, the kind of freedom that we get as indie authors, because especially if you're a first timer, too much freedom might not necessarily be a great thing. You're breaking into an industry that you've never done anything in before, and in a situation like that, you ideally would want some experts giving you some pointers and things like that. And I know that that's hard for a lot of writers to hear these days. Everybody wants to do it themselves. I want to do it myself. I absolutely do. And yet I kind of want a professional looking over my shoulder going, hey man, are you sure you want to do it? Are you sure that's a good idea?
and I think at a certain point, and this is an area where genre fiction writers, there's things that we do very, very well, and there's things that we struggle with. I think one of the things that we do well is output. I mean, you talk to those literary fiction people, they'll release a novel about every 10 years, and it's like 300 pages long. And it's like, man, the heroes in my genre, like they're throwing down those novels about every 6 months. Like they are working,
cranking them out.
And they, you worry about burnout with indie authors, but man, their work ethic, I would put the work ethic of an indie author up against almost anyone else. So that's the good side of it. The good side is indie authors are just absolute, just powerful in that regard. But
yeah, you're choosing to take on all of that. Like you're choosing to be the end point of every part of the process.
Yeah,
that's a huge undertaking.
The downside is, of the indie authors in the genre field, and I might get some flack for this, but you were talking about, it's good to have experts who can let you know what looks good. I think that our sense of taste is a little bit compromised. What we think looks good, what we think sounds good, in many ways it has been polluted would be a strong word. It would be a little bit corrupted, tarnished maybe by the things that we've read and the things that we enjoy. So you even look at just look at Robin Hobb's original covers to her Farseer trilogy. They look terrible, absolutely terrible. But somehow those are the books that we grew up on and that we love in the fantasy genre.
Those books have made babies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
And even the Wheel of Time books, you look at those original covers for the Wheel of Time, and it does not look great. Yeah, but for rough. People who love that genre, it's awesome. Like it evokes all these great feelings and memories. But if you were to wave that in the face of someone who's not generally a fantasy reader, I don't know if they would respond as positively to it. And I think sometimes our tastes are not as well refined. I think that some publishers are better than others, but as an indie creator, it's really great to have people looking over your shoulder, both people who are in fantasy, but then it's also good to get your friends who don't normally read fantasy to look at it and go, would you read this? And they might be like, nah, it looks a little hokey to me. And
there's something about wanting to reach a more universal audience with what you're doing. But it's an interesting dance because what the internet has done for pretty much everybody, but in this case speaking about authors, what it's done for authors is given us the opportunity to put ourselves out into the world, right? So like our vision of the cover, our vision of this book I mentioned this on a previous show, but I run into so many new first time authors putting out some books, and they're excited because their books are in stores, and that's great, and I'm excited for them. But then I asked them what the editing process was like, and they tell me they didn't go to a professional editor, they just did it themselves and put it out. And like I can't hide my fear for them. Like I just what did you do? It's just this thing where like you can't take that back, man. Like once you put the book out there, it's out there. It don't skip the professional edit. And so it's one of these things where like it's given us so much freedom. In some cases, it might be too much freedom for folks who don't know how to like rein it in a little bit. And so it's this beautiful dance where like when it comes time, for example, to designing the cover, I'm going to want it to invoke a particular idea, thought, theme, whatever. I'm going to go to an artist who can do it for me. I have to rein myself in, you know what I mean? And not be like, it needs to be like, no, because that's not what I do. And I might put something out there that's not going to be as good as it could have been if I go to somebody who does that. That's what they do. And they're like, hey, here's how I would do it for you. What do you think of this? Like, allow people who are great at what they do to do what they do. Like, especially, you commission an artist, a cover designer, anything like that. Number one, you've looked at their work. You like their work, and you're hiring them because you think their style is appropriate for your work. So let them do it,
Well,
it's a hard thing to hear for some authors, right?
Oh, absolutely. And this is one of those things that'll be this is going to be a big hurdle as indie genre in general, whether we're talking horror, fantasy, sci-fi, whatever you're doing as an indie author, the editing process is going to be a big hurdle. I have some friends who work in traditional publishing. I have a friend that's an editor-in-chief at a little boutique publisher. She'd probably not like that term, but it's a small publisher in Dallas. And she tells me that she reads every book 10 times before she publishes it.
Whoa.
And I also know Sandra Brown, who is a thriller author. She says that even the published books will have about 10 or 8 typos in it. The average published book will have 8 typos. And so you think about, you have professionals who are reading the book about 10 times, and they're just like the big developmental editors. They've also got line editors. Mm-hmm. They have multiple proofreaders, and they're still going to get typos.
Let me tell you what, I have a copy here. I have a copy here of my favorite book, American Gods, by
it's a great one.
Mr. Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
As you can see by this beautiful hardcover, this is not the first printing. This
Gorgeous,
is a beautiful, premiere edition hardcover. The pages look like Bible pages. They even have like the silver on the edges. They're super thin, like Bible pages. They're almost transparent. It's a beautiful book.
Are the words of Wednesday in red? Like
no, but that would have been a nice touch. Now, this, I have found typos in this book.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to like ease up about that kind of stuff, authors, because Mr. Neil Gaiman made the original mistakes, and then his 19, editors and proofreaders and line editors all missed a few. And then the reprinters all missed a few. And to this, all the way down to this edition, we still have typos in it. So relax.
But what that makes you realize is if that's what the quote unquote professional end of things, if that's what they're going through, think about how much worse it is for indie authors who don't even use an editor.
Exactly.
Like that's rough.
When you have dudes who charge by the word, who do this for a living, and they still miss stuff, think about how much you're missing. Absolutely. I mean, I edit everything that I write the night before. So every time I sit down to write something new, first I edit yesterday's work, and then I start something new. So and the amount of stuff that I find, it's incredible, right? And then later on, I'll edit it again, and then I'll send it off to a critique partner, and they'll send it back covered in red. And I'll fix all of those mistakes, and then I'll send it off to another, a beta reader, and he'll send it back all covered up in red, and I'll fix those. And like it feels like it never ends. Like there's always typos.
Absolutely. And it really depends on kind of how you're working. Like for me, I'm working on a pretty fast, every 3 months I want a new novella out there. And so my turnaround is a little bit different, but part of it is I'm also preparing for when the whole thing is done. Then I'll go through it again. Like it's like, okay, all 9 books are out. Now let's look at what we've written, and before we do anything else, I'll probably get some more proofreaders. I'm actually very fortunate in that because of Patreon, I've been able to afford a editor and a proofreader for my series, and I have two amazing people. Holly Lynn Walrath is my developmental editor, and she is next level. I don't know what I would do without her. And I will say this, I think sometimes as an indie author, you have to know what kind of editor you are, because as the writer, you are always the first editor of your work.
Exactly.
And I know some writers who they tend to think on the proofing level. Like they'll read through it and they'll catch the typos. And I know some people who are more of a developmental
that's not
editor.
Everything, you're looking for the structure of the story, the character arcs, the flow, all of these things are things that editors are helping you with in the developmental edit. Absolutely.
And for me, and for me, I tend to be a line editor. I always look at the sentence level, and that's what I'm if I get stuck looking at my own stuff, that's the stuff I'm tinkering with.
Mm-hmm.
Holly is a really great big picture editor, and so she'll read through it and go, okay, like in book 3, there's some pretty gruesome stuff that happens in book 3, but in my first draft, I always kind of went off camera for the bad stuff, and then you come back to see what had happened. And I thought it was building up tension because you're not really seeing what's going on and all that. And she told me, she was like, you have, and a little bit of a spoiler here, but she was like, you have this monstrous figure that basically beheads this person with their own sword. She's like, I want to see that.
Yeah.
And I was like, you do?
Moment. Yeah.
Yeah. She was like, yeah, write it. And so I was like, okay. So I then wrote it, and I was like, oh yeah, this is what it needed to be.
Yeah.
But I needed her to be like, you're wimping out here. You're not showing
You're
the
pulling
scenes.
your punches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. So I had to rewrite it, and it's a better book because of it. And then I also have a proofreader, and her name's Kara Robinson, and she is so great. She works, catching all the little things, and we still miss stuff, but that's to be expected. But yeah, we're always going through it. And then of course my wife, she's my beta reader, but she's kind of my outside opinion reader because she's not a fantasy fan. So when she's reading it, she's not like, she doesn't care about the tropes. She just wants to know, like, she has all the questions that probably we should be asking.
Yeah.
But she thinks to ask because she hasn't read like a whole stack of fantasy novels. And so she's like, well, why does this happen? And I think about it, I'm like, oh, I don't know why. I have to go back and work through it. So I always have fun talking with her. She's my first reader, and she's always the person who comes to it pretty fresh. And I always appreciate that.
My wife doesn't read my stuff. She's always like, when you finish it, I'll read it. And I'm like, no, you won't. You don't read anything that I write. We were talking about knowing the kind of editor that you are.
Yeah.
And like you, I know myself to be a line editor like that. I'm looking for typos. I'm looking for punctuation and spelling and stuff like that. I'm not really thinking about like structural editing when I'm editing my work. Because I know that about myself, I go heavy into the structure before I write. So,
yes.
If I'm doing a chapter, I outline that chapter. I make sure that I'm hitting like all the beats that a story needs to go through a nice little arc in each chapter. And then I write it based off of that outline. So I always have, storytelling structure already like ingrained into what I'm writing before I write it. So I don't need to think about it later when I'm editing. It's already there, Know what kind of editor you are and prepare accordingly. I like that a lot.
Now, are you a scratch paper person, or are you outlining on the screen?
I have gone through an evolution with my outlining. So now I am using an online program called Dabble. I don't know if you're familiar. It's a program or an app developed specifically for novel writers. So rather than using a Word, processor or even Scrivener, Dabble is specifically designed for like ease of use, like iPhone user friendly, kind of an interface. And so one of the things that they do on there is they have digital index cards, right? And each one is tied directly to the appropriate scene in your manuscript. So whatever scene you're writing, you can at any moment just click on the index card and boom, there it is. And it tells you everything that you outlined on your index card. And if you look at it on the grid, you can move the index cards around and your manuscript updates with it. So you can edit any way you like. You can edit from the outline phase with the index cards. You can edit, in the actual manuscript itself, and it always updates everything accordingly. So that's what I use now. I outline on those index cards. I just have like a whole grid of index cards on there that I edit with.
I feel like Dabble should be a paid sponsor of this podcast here.
I have thought about reaching out to them because I'm a big fan of what they do over there, man.
All right, so people who are listening to this, dabblewriter.com, let them know that you heard about them through this podcast.
Oh man, you're good. I need to put you on retainer. You need to come back and help me with my marketing. This is good.
We're all hustling. Yeah.
Yeah, man. We're all just out here trying to make a buck. Come on, Dabble. This is like the third time I've mentioned Dabble on this channel, by the way. So you're right. I really should be sponsored.
You got me checking it out. So there we go. It works. I've been using Scrivener, and I tend to just write little. I'm not good at just bullet pointing it. I tend to just write out like loose notes throughout it. But I wish I was better at doing more of a bullet pointed or a sloppier sort of circles and lines and post-it notes on a wall. I tend to, because the thing is when you're like writing it out the way that I am, you still get a little stuck in your ways. You're not as free to say, okay, I'm going to move this or I'll switch this here. And so I need to get a little bit looser in that phase. It's the same thing in comics. There are a lot of comic book pencilers who they tend to draw so tightly that they don't give anything for the inker to do.
Yeah,
and you got to be loose.
Yeah, they're too tight on the idea phase. Like that's where you have to be loose and let things kind of come and go into the process. Absolutely. Yep. I wanted to show you from the inside what it actually looked like. So like when you're looking at your full manuscript, if I was to move these around, the manuscript has just updated those scenes and switched them around however I move them. But you have, your entire outline set up there. You can go to the chapter and you have your index cards right here, and it's just easy. It's just.
And this is all web-based, so you can take it pretty much anywhere.
You can do it on your phone. You can do it at work. You can do it anywhere. Absolutely anywhere, anytime. It's web-based, so you don't have to worry about it taking up room. You can export directly into either a Word document or a PDF, and it's a manuscript. It's already formatted for a manuscript. You can then transfer it over to a formatting program, fix it up, and send it right to the printer from. It's made for authors. Awesome.
Nice. It scares me though, because I do hear about these younger authors who are like, I wrote my novel on my phone, and I'm like, you son of a.
They can. I mean, if you can do it, but I guess.
But it so impresses me that I'm like, wow. Okay, yeah. I'm sitting in front of my computer like an old man here, typing away.
I still do that. That's still me too. Is the computer? I can't.
I think that's like the Wattpad. Like people who grew up with Wattpad, they're going to take over the world. I can
outline on my phone. I'll outline all day on my phone. But for writing, you want to sit down. You got to have a back to your chair, and absolutely. So you wanted to come on. I just splashed myself in the face. You wanted to come on and talk a little bit about what you've got going on this week. What's going down, man?
Yeah, so on the day that this drops, September 16th, if everything goes well, September 16th, I am dubbing it DRYAD'S CROWN Day. And one of the reasons why is I just want to make a huge push for people who have not read the series yet. Whenever, and this is true with any indie author, is you always have like friends and family that are your first line of support. And they're like, I bought your book. You're like, great. And then it's just crickets for a few months after that. And you're like, okay, well, my friends and family read the book. And, I love my mom, but it's really funny when she reads my book and she's like, it was weird. I'm like, well, it was fantasy. She's like, it's kind of like a fairy tale. And I was like, once again, it's fantasy. That's kind of its thing. And my dad's like, I didn't like it. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, too many characters died. I'm like, well, sorry. So I'm trying to get people besides my family and my friends to read my book, and it comes down to marketing. But anytime you're making a marketing push, man, it's about the calendar. You have got to pick, because if you just sprinkle out your efforts over the course of a year, nothing's going to grow. You've got to pick a day, 2 days, every 3 months or so, and just be like, this is the day. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. I've looked at a few sort of lower priced but high impact options to kind of get the word out through newsletter swaps, through things like BookBub. I'm using I wish I brought it up, but I've got a few that I'm using. Oh wait, I have it right here. Yeah, I'm using Bargain Booksy, and then there's British Knight on Fiverr. There's Just Kindle. There's Awesome Gang. There's a few on there that I'm working with them, and they're relatively affordable. We're talking like $10 here, $30 here, and doing them all at once. I'm using Story Origin, StoryOriginApp.com. They can be another sponsor. And I'm using them for swaps. My experience with newsletter swaps, I don't think anyone does it better than they do. They're really good at that stuff. So
I hadn't even heard of it until you were asking about it the other day in the chat on Instagram. So I didn't know people did that.
Yeah, it works out. I would say this. There was a time maybe a few years ago where swaps were tremendously effective because you would say, okay, I'm going to mention your book on my newsletter on this day, and you do it on yours. And newsletters are still one of the best things you can do marketing-wise for yourself. And the swaps used to work really well, but everyone started doing it, so it stopped working as well. But I think Story Origin, the way they've got it set up, where you can actually see the size of the person's mailing list, their open rate, the genre that they're working in, because it just gets awkward when you ask someone for a swap and they're like, well, I write, urban fantasy romance, but this and this, and you write high fantasy, so I can't play with you. We have, so, but what you do when you're on Story Origin is you can look through all of it and make sure that they're the same genre and the same on.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you send it off to them, and then they'll either accept or reject, and then you go from there. It's super, super easy. So I'm doing all of that stuff on the 16th, on today, really to get people to DRYAD'SCROWN.com. That's where everyone needs to go, because that's where the books are.
All right, hold on. First of all, I want to throw it up on the screen here, so I'm gonna create a little thing here. Dryad, DRYAD.
Yep.
DRYAD'SCROWN.com.
Yep, and that will actually lead you to the series page on Amazon.
All right. And I'll throw that into the description on the video when it airs as well.
Wonderful. And yeah, books on this day, books 2 and 3 are going to be free, and book 1 is 99 cents. So that'll be another good motivator is price. You'll get all 3 books for like $1.
Sorry, my kid just ran in here.
This is how we roll. I've got my kid locked out of my house.
They're supposed to be watched, but okay. You were talking about the mailing list, being, they're both fantasy, but they're just like a little bit different, so you can't see. Here's the thing, man. I think it's healthy to read outside of the genre that you write in. I agree. It's good for you as a writer. I think that it's going to teach you a lot of things that you wouldn't get from reading the same thing that you write. And so I feel like the same is true a little bit when it comes to crossovers in genre audiences. Folks, I don't know anyone who only reads one kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, most people read a few different genres at least. If not, I'll read pretty much anything. So it's one of those things where it's like you can advertise together. You can kind of do these mailing list swaps. And any eyes seeing your stuff is going to be good. I know that there's legitimate marketing, psychology even behind finding your niche and your niche audience and advertising directly to them. Absolutely. I'm doing it too. Like, my partners are gearing stuff up right now for our platform launch. So absolutely that's true. But at the same time, any eyeball seeing your stuff is good for you. Like, that's just more exposure. That's just there's always a chance that somebody's gonna go, hey, that looks kind of cool. It's something they've never seen before. That would be good. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't normally read stuff like this. Let me check it out. Happens
well, and it reminds me of Stan Lee back when he was editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics. His big mandate was that everyone's comic is somebody's first comic.
Yes.
And that was They don't really write that way anymore, but that used to be the thing, was you could pick up any
they
Marvel
kind of
comic.
still do. They do kind of still do that because they'll let you know like where you can
That's true.
find things connecting and everything. Like they do still kind of do that.
But those larger story arcs, which I love comics still, it's one of my first loves. But I do
Same.
think that as a writer, you have to have that mentality of, okay, yes, there is the ideal reader for me. If you love Robin Hobb, if you like the Graceling series, these are going to be people that will really like the Dryad's Crown.
Nice.
I feel it in my bones. But I also love the idea of some kid picking up the book and just getting their little mind blown because they've never read anything like this before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I was that little kid once.
I told a story on a previous show where one of the earliest books I can remember reading was a book called Goblins in the Castle. My second grade teacher read it to our class, and then I took it home and devoured it over and over again. And it a classic little fantasy story with little goblins that are running around, and like they kidnap some kids, and the kids are in the castle and they're trying to escape. And it was this thrilling thing for me. Like it second grade, changed my life, and now I'm writing a sci-fi fantasy novel. You know what I mean? Like,
shout out to Bruce Colville, who was the author of that, originally published in 1992. I just brought it up.
You're good at this. You're good at this, man. Do you have your own show? You need your own show.
No, I'm too busy trying to get on your show. So it's I'm done.
maybe I need a co-host.
There we go.
Who can run the screen for me?
Be like, well, did you know Goblins in the Castle? But yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, when I was in junior high, I was not Stephen King's target audience, because no kid in 7th grade should be reading some of the stuff that I was reading. But that was the thing that I loved, because reading his stuff, it felt like I was getting away with something. Because I was like, man, if mom and dad knew what I was reading, they would be so pissed off.
I had a similar thing, but in my case, I was reading Michael Crichton novels in 7th grade. In 7th grade, it was all I wanted to read. I read every Michael Crichton novel I could get my hands on. And it was like I wore it like a badge of honor, because I was like, these are smart books. Yeah. I'm reading a smart novel. I'm smarter than you because I can read Michael Crichton and understand it. So I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, and that's always the thing, is like, we don't always stumble across the books that we're supposed to read. Sometimes we find things that are maybe a little bit out of our depth, and we dig into it, and it just imprints on us in a certain way that, even as an adult, I've still got some of the damage that I had from reading the Gunslinger. So it's still there.
That's some heavy stuff, man.
Yeah. No, it's
dark stuff.
It still gives me chills when I read it. And I think that as fantasy authors, I mean, you're right. There's going to be our target audience, those people that appeal, but any eyes that are picking up that book, I worry about if we get so into our genre that you kind of have to be able to speak the language or have the secret handshake in order to get it. Like, I promise you, no first-time fantasy reader is going, well, this really doesn't work as a hard magic system, and so I don't know if I can stand by it because Brandon Sanderson says...
Yeah. They're going, look at the dragons, they're so cool. That's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Like, think about that. Think about Game of Thrones and the impact that it had on pop culture, just because it had some really awesome dragons in it. And it's like... I mean, it really, like, it changed the world. Everybody's into fantasy now. It's crazy. What's interesting about that is there's a lot to be learned about storytelling from movies and television shows, and this sort of cinematic kind of element that they bring to storytelling, where it's an event, it's a spectacle, and that's kind of something that I want to bring to my novel. I'm trying to trademark the term cinematic prose. I'm like, that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to write a movie, but it's a novel. And like, when you read it, you're going to feel like you're watching an awesome, big sci-fi fantasy movie. And, one of the things that I learned from being a movie lover and a lover of the process of making movies is that there's several versions of the movie throughout its creation. You know, you write that movie several times. So you write the script, and that's one version, and then you shoot it, and that's a whole other version, and then you edit that footage, and that's a whole other version. You find the movie along the way, and a lot of times what ends up in the theater is not at all what was on the page. It's something completely different because it's gone through a metamorphosis throughout the process. And I try to bring that same kind of like fluidity to the creation of the novel, where like you were saying earlier, it's going to go through edits, it's going to go through a developmental edit. You know, they're going to work on the structure of your novel, the flow of it, the way that your character arc is spread out throughout the course of the pages. Like all of that is going to get tweaked and changed, and it's going to transform your story into a very well told, you know, awesome tale. It's crazy, the process.
Well, and I think about particularly your challenge, I think, is in making a book more cinematic, is, man, when you're watching a movie, you are strapped in and you are kind of moving at the pace that the movie dictates. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that prose is going to have to move. Mm-hmm. You know, I mentioned Stephen King, but I think one of the things that makes Stephen King such a great author is I think he is one of the most readable authors of big book. Like when you've got a big book, reading 1,000 pages of Stephen King is like reading 500 pages of another author. And so you'll be like, I read all of these books, and you get this sense of accomplishment. But with the Stephen King book, man, you can get through those so quickly. Yeah. And I think part of it is he has a knack for moving the reader through at his pace. And I think that that's really the challenge to capture that cinematic feel, is where people just get so lost in what they're reading mm-hmm. that they just keep going, and that's a gift.
Yeah, well, you know, I mentioned earlier that I have to like put structure into like the outlining, you know, before I even start writing the chapters, because I know that about myself. And so the structure that I chose, I took from the Screenwriter's Bible. You know, this how-to book, so to speak, where it teaches you like how to write a movie script. And that's what I use for the structures of my story. I use it on a macro level throughout the series. I use it on a smaller level on each novel. And then again, in each chapter, every chapter has this like 7 turning point flow to it, with a beginning, middle, and end. And so every chapter should feel like maybe the episode of a series, you know. If not its own movie, then maybe an episode within a television show, where like it keeps the story moving, constantly moving forward to the next, what's going to happen next. You know?
Oh, that's great. Well, and honestly, you know, I started off in comics, and when I was writing comics, there weren't many books on how to write comics or how to script them. And so a lot of us writers at that time, we were all turning to the language of screenwriting in order to figure out how to do our comics. And so you'll mm-hmm. get a lot of writers of that time who, we were raised on Robert McKee's story, and we were raised on, you know, some other books like the Screenwriter's Bible and things like that. And mm-hmm. I think that some of those screenwriting books are actually more useful when it comes to structure than a lot of the writing books that I've read. Yes. I have struggled to find good books about how to be a good writer. I mean, everyone talks about The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. Everyone talks about Stephen King's On Writing. There's a few others. I really like A Writer's Coach by Jack Hart. But when you talk about story structure, man, Robert McKee's story, I mean, and books like that, I think those are just as beneficial to indie writers of prose as it would be for prospective for aspiring screenwriters.
I wholeheartedly agree. And the reason that I was drawn to it was because, you know, a film has to tell a complete story in an hour and a half. Yeah. 2 hours to 2.5 hours if you're Christopher Nolan. But for the most part, about 90 minutes, you have to grab an audience attention, make them care about the characters, put them through an emotional roller coaster, and give them a satisfying climactic ending. You have to do all of that in a short amount of time, and therefore a very, very well-made film script is just full of tight storytelling. They cut out all of the fat and they just give you what you need to tell the best version of this story. And so a lot of what I ended up doing was looking at my favorite movies, asking myself why they're my favorite. What is it about them that I love? What is it about the story that captures my imagination, or about the way that the film is made or told? Because it's a visual medium. The story is the entire film. It's not just the script. The entire film is the story. So what do you learn from that? What do you take out of that? And then trying to put that into the crafting of a novel, because that's what I want. I want to tell an epic sci-fi fantasy as tightly as possible, especially with how much editors charge. I need to get my word count way down because it's gigantic right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think, when you're looking at screenwriters, I mean, they know, like, within the first 10 minutes, you got to get to the point.
Yeah.
I think about, I love Tolkien, but Tolkien is a nightmare when you look at him.
Reader, somebody who's never read no way. They're like, it's the Bible. You're asking me to read the Bible right now.
Yeah, because Tolkien does not get to the point in the first 10 minutes or 10 pages. No. It's not really until you're at like the Prancing Pony and the Council of Elrond till you really know what's going on. And there are these massive, but here's the thing is Tolkien is writing to a different kind of reader. And you said it's like the Bible, and I agree. It's this it's this immersion of this world, and he's not writing with film in mind. And I think that for people who are writing with film in mind, part of it is, and when I say streamlining, you're streamlining, but you're also trying to capture the essence of a character without it feeling sort of hackneyed or like you've seen that character before. You still have to tell a good story. You still have to like pay off everything that one needs to do in order to tell a full and complete story, especially through the characters. Like, characters have to live and breathe. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I even think about, like, you think about the language of film. Man, that first shot in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings where we see Strider, and he's got that pipe and he's in the shadows with the cloak, and
the embers like light up his face like ever so briefly, like just his eyes, and then it goes back down, like beautiful. I'm like,
but here's the thing: is that visual language? I know who that character is. Like, immediately, I'm like, oh, that guy. This is that guy, and I'm here for him. But writers, we have to find that shorthand of how do we communicate these characters with a visual touch, with a few words that really kind of paint that picture. So we go, oh yeah, this guy, I know who we're talking about here. And then we can flesh them out a little bit more. I do think that one of the keys in writing is we have to give space for the readers to create the characters as well. To where people
live in their minds. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you don't want to get to a point to where the reader is like, I've got an idea of your main character, but I don't know if it's the right version. Like, no. This is part of the fun is your version of my main character is your version, and it works. Like, I always feel bad sometimes when, you do see something made to film and you're like, well, I never really pictured it that way. It's like, well, but your experience reading it was still very valid. And I think that as writers, we got to give space for the reader to be part of the creative process. And that's part of the joy of reading something is, man, it is existing in my head in a way that, I'm filling in the blanks without even realizing it. Yeah. And I think sometimes writers, when they're like, the guy walked in the room and he was 6'5" with, salt and pepper beard and a bald head and crazy eyebrows and his glasses, and they spend so long describing every bit of that character. I'm like, man, the reader doesn't care.
It stops the action dead in its tracks. Like, now all of a sudden I'm just looking this dude up and down. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah.
This is creepy. But if you give him, he had the appearance of everyone's favorite college professor, and then you go, okay, I know who that is. Yeah. Now my image is different than yours, but I got it.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm seeing, the tweed jacket with the patches on the elbows. The whole thing. Absolutely. Crazy hair. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there. So I do think that's one of the great joys, and I do think that the more that you write as you're watching movies and as you're reading other books, you get to a moment where you're like, oh, I see what they did there.
Yeah.
And you start taking little notes in your head. You're like, okay, yeah, I get it. I get what you're doing.
We had a digital artist on Livestream Sunday today, and she does portraits for indie authors, and it talking to her about how it feels as an author to give somebody a description of your character, a few things about them, and get back an image, and then to be able to tweak it if you need be, until you get it to a point where you're like, that's them. That's who I had in my brain. And the kind of synchronicity that it takes between writer and artist to kind of like create this thing together, but also allowing the artist to create, you know what I mean? Like when she sent me the finished products, like there were touches on there, little details on there that I didn't tell her to put in that were just, like beautiful, you know what I mean? Like one of the things that she did was for my character Faye, who is this kind of like hippie chick. She has like red dreadlocks and freckles, and she usually dresses in like silk and stuff like that. She on the skirt she put in like this pattern with like these flowers, almost Hawaiian flowers that were like this kind of big and like swirling around. So it wasn't exactly tie-dye, but it kind of gave that sort of vibe, you know what I mean? And you were like, oh yeah, there it is, a nice little touch that makes her stand out, makes her a little more unique, but also familiar. Like those are the things that you have to allow your artist to breathe into the life of your character.
Oh, absolutely. And you think about with fantasy, I mean, fantasy has been, illustrated fantasy has been with us as long as the genre has been with us. I mean, we look at Alice in Wonderland, we look at The Princess and the Goblin, even with more recent stuff. I mean, illustration has always been part of it.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. I mean, yeah, it's all there. And so, yes, it can be financially prohibitive for some people, and you've got to kind of understand that. But yeah, it can be. But
it's not cheap. It's not cheap.
But the funny thing is even when I've read wonderful illustrated fantasy novels, I still have a picture in my head that's different than what the artist created.
Mm-hmm. Same. Yeah.
Where I'm like, okay, yep, but that's not how Roland looks in my head. So moving on.
Yeah, and it also gets a little muddy once the movies start coming out. Like now Aragorn looks like Aragorn from the movies to me, and that's not what he's described as looking like in the book. So it starts to clash when you're reading it, and you're seeing one thing and you're reading another thing. Like those are little things that you don't necessarily think about when you're first writing the novel and wanting to put it out and maybe hoping that someday it becomes a movie.
Yeah, well, and you even think about things like Legolas. Like, obviously, the most distinctive thing about Legolas is his blonde hair, but it never says in the book anything about his hair. I mean,
yeah, I can't think of a single mention. Yeah, that's a good point.
No mention. Yeah. But we think about Legolas. We think of the long, straight blonde hair, and that's
fact,
not it.
When you see like minimalist drawings of Lord of the Rings characters, it's always his hair. Like that's what they focus on. He's the archer, but they focus on his hair.
Yeah. And it is funny because the movie and other illustrations and fan art, I mean, it all kind of has a life of its own. I think a lot of us nowadays will fan cast our books. We're like, well, if I could choose, I'd pick this actor or this actress, and we do that. But you never know how it's going to go or how it's going to be taken, and that's fine. That's part of the game.
Yeah, I have my novel fan casted already as well. You know what? I closed it down. My main character, Magdalia, she's a detective. I just see her as being played by Zazie Beetz. For some reason,
nice.
That's just who it is. Prominent.
All right. Well,
Zazie Beetz.
Well, since we're talking about it, I'm bringing up the page. If we've got it.
Yeah, I can throw it back in here. There you go.
So here we go. Here is the Dryad's Crown. This is my fan casting. You could cast it differently, but I've got for Silbury, who's the main character. Emma Appleton, who you might remember from The Witcher. She was in one episode.
Okay.
Callus, who's her husband. Maricel, who is their neighbor. Abek Skarsgård got Jonathan Majors, who is obviously in Loki recently. And this is even a little spoilerish because I've got like younger and older versions of Gideon and Yurik, who are the children of Silbury. But at this point, we only see the younger versions, so we know they survive. And then Bren Caius, Gillian Anderson, Kret Bonebreaker, Keoth the Goat Slayer, Ostre, Oren, they're all here. But yeah, I did it, and you know what will happen is someday.
Bottom right corner. Is that the actress from Luther? Am I seeing her?
Yeah, right? Ruth Wilson. She was in Luther, and she was also in His Dark Materials, the HBO series.
I haven't watched that yet, but I'm such a big fan of hers.
No, she plays in the Dryad's Crown. Dahlia Tulane plays sort of the wicked stepmother type character. And when I think of a wicked stepmother, Ruth Wilson comes to mind so quickly.
Yeah, you kind of nailed that one. This is such a cool idea. I really like this. I like that you did this. Now
it is fun.
It makes me want to do it as well, but now I'm stealing your idea.
No, you should totally go for it. But I will say this. I think it's better to write the book and then go back and fan cast. I also think that if ever, like, let's hope that we're all so big that we have to worry about Hollywood. I would probably delete this the moment anything like that happened.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't. Last thing we need is for me to get in the way of it and be like, well, David, he felt like Emma Appleton should play the lead role, and
especially if it's been a while too. Like they age out. Like it's not even they're not even the right age for the character anymore.
Yeah, no, it's funny working in comics. I have done some stuff with Hollywood, and it's not nearly as exciting or as romantic as you would think it is, because they will buy up properties with no interest in actually producing it.
Oh yeah, just to keep it on their shelf so that nobody else will make it. It's weird. It's weird that they do that, and then you have to fight forever to get the rights back, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah, I had a situation where I was talking to my editor, and I was like, so they're going to pay me this amount of money, but they're not going to do anything with it. And then after 3 years, I get it back, and they're like, "Yep." I was like, "All right, sounds good." I'll take the check. And honestly,
it was that way. Yeah, it's just free money. Okay.
So they're just gonna pay me to not do anything with it. All right, it's cool. And I mean, in comics, that was like the most. It was the most money I think I'd ever made working on a comic. Was just them. It was Nickelodeon that was interested in one of my projects, and they paid a decent amount of money, but we all knew that there was, but they had no interest in actually running with it. But I think it was one of those things where they're like, well, if it gets big, we got it on a discount. So for them, the numbers were, they've got the math down where they're like, okay, we'll pay this much, and if it becomes a hit, well, then we just paid nothing for it, essentially.
It's such odd thinking coming from a major company, because, well, if you put some money behind it, it might be a hit, like you could make it a hit.
Yeah.
How odd, man. Like, oh geez, all of the corporate like contract side of Hollywood is just so like I don't know, intimidating to me, because it would be something of a dream come true to someday have like, I don't know, HBO come up and be like, hey man, we want to turn your novel series into a TV show. It's going to be the next Game of Thrones. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But I mean, come on.
I will say though, I saw it happen in the comic book industry, and I think it will happen. Maybe not now. Give it maybe about 10 more years. I bet it'll happen in the indie book industry, because
you think?
I think that a lot of film studios are going to look at it as sort of like a farm that is ripe for the picking.
I'll bet.
Because
they're so rich with so many stories right there, and after the success of something like Game of Thrones, based off of a sci-fi novel, series, fantasy novel series rather, absolutely, it might.
Well, and the thing is those big names, they are a pain to work with.
Once they get big, that's the thing. You make them big, and then you make them hard to work with.
But if you're taking some indie author who's like, sure, I'll take $50,000 for you to option the rights to this book. And it might be, and I think this is the thing, is once indie authors begin to start getting bigger sales,
right?
And they're like, okay, you don't have a manager, you don't have an agent, you don't have a publisher, and I can just write you a check and just run off with your story. I think a lot of the film studios are going to see that as a plus, particularly if their fan base is well developed. But I think all that's going to take time. But
yeah,
if I was a book publisher, I would be very worried about that, because I know that book publishers, that's a big part of their business, is just licensing and optioning out that work. And if all of a sudden Hollywood is looking at those indie authors being like, well, I can use this too.
yeah. And you know what?
It'll come.
It's another reason why I'm approaching my novel the way that I am, because if I'm just making it easier for somebody to adapt it into a movie or a TV show later on, then even better, because I want it to be good. If anybody ever does pick it up and make it, I want it to be something of quality. So just make the book as good, as cinematic, as exciting as possible. Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Hopkins,
yes.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We are out of time for today. This has just flown by. This has been way too short. I'm so sorry. But please take a second to talk to the folks at home. Let them know anything you have coming up, anything you want them to know about. Now's your time to plug away, my friend.
All right. Well, if you want to jump into the DRYAD'S CROWN series, now is the time to do it. Today, September 16th, books 2 and 3 are free. You can hop on DRYAD'sCROWN.com, download books 2 and 3, and you'll pay nothing. But then book 1 is only 99 cents. So you can get books 1, 2, and 3 for less than $1, and it'll set you up for this 9-book series. A new book is being released every 3 months. Book 4 will be out in mid-October. And if you are into high fantasy, if you're into big drama and moving scenes, a little bit of love, a little bit of family, and just magic, and a little bit of fae adventure, I think that you're really going to enjoy this book series. But you got to go to DRYAD'sCROWN.com to check it out.
All right, everybody.
How did I do? Did I do good?
Nailed it like
okay,
a pro. Good. Nailed it. Absolutely. Guys, go to the website, DRYAD'sCROWN.com. Also, Mr. Hopkins has his own website that's scrolling down below right now. You'll find his links in the description, including his Instagram. The video versions, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, thanks for stopping by. We do a live premiere, so there will be people in the chat when this happens. It's going to be at 11 a.m. And if you prefer the audio versions, they're available on the same day on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Come back on Sunday. We're going to do live stream Sunday with 2 guests, and it's going to be more of a discussion kind of episode, not so much of an interview. So it'll be a little more, chat heavy and a lot more fun that way. So guys, thank you so much. Mr. Hopkins, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And this was a real pleasure. Till next time, my friend.
Talk to you then.